my name is Jamaica3, and you are watching AMG News, news that somewhat matters. The year is 1920, and a lot has occurred over the past 20 decades as for working for the Union, with many of the strikes and outbreaks. Golly, what a mess it's been. Today, we dive a little bit deeper, though, into this part of America's history as to why such things occurred. We also will have Mr. Brandon Bromeo, who has interviewed many of the said workers, ask them questions about their hardships, and who was kind enough to send over his 20 years of forming the Union tapes. I am Jeremiah Guthrie, and you are watching AMG News, brought to you by Mr. Brandon Bromeo with his 20 years of forming the Union tapes. Back to you.
Good evening, folks. I am Brandon Romeo, and you are watching the 20 years of forming the Union tapes. A brief history lesson before we begin. As we know, in Chicago, Illinois, 1905, the Industrial Workers of the World was formed as an alternate militia wing of labor movements founded by Mr. William Dudley Haywood. Many labor movements, such as the Cripple Creek, were held by state militia in 1904 to control the means of production by workers, which allowed the Union to accept all people into its ranks. This included ethnicity and gender. Here I have this spiffy woman, Miss Vanessa Aguilar, a female Mexican worker who was a part of the march of forming the International Workers of the World in New York in 1909. Now, ma'am, if you don't mind, would you care to tell us your story in working for the Union in New York?
Thank you for having me, Mr. Romero. Working for the Union was, how do I put it, an unpredictable set of circumstances.
What made it so unpredictable for your colleagues?
Well, mainly the low pay and being unable to feed our families and children. The overall fear of being replaced by white male workers, who they saw as more reliable. Discrimination is what that was.
Really?
Yeah, that was when us women in the garment industry voted for a general strike for the miserable low pay and work hours.
What all happened during the strike?
Well, the march was led by female managers and had roughly around 30,000 workers walking down the street of New York. Amazing. They were demanding higher pay and hour cuts. Unfortunately, we lost 5 women during the strike, and they got a little violent with us.
I am awfully sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it took 11 weeks for the employees to give in to our demands and give us a shorter week from the work and less discrimination laws, which made us very proud and accomplished.
That's amazing. It seems as if things were getting better for you.
Well, it wasn't all good news after the 2 years. After the strike, I had dealt with the fire that took place in the factory in Greenwich.
No way. We're involved in that too.
I was lucky, and I got away before it got bad.
Would you mind telling us about that? We should have a little bit of time left.
Well, in case you didn't read the newspaper, what happened was, due to the awful conditions of the factory, it caused a safety hazard, resulting from a match hitting fabric, catching on fire. Well, we all had to evacuate, and the horrid owners of the factory decided to lock the doors to avoid the fire from spreading into other rooms, neglecting to realize that 146 workers were trapped inside, unable to escape. I can't remember the exact numbers, but 23 were men and 123 were women. I think that's right, from what I've been told.
That's horrible, Miss Aguilar.
Yeah, I know.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now. Thank you for letting me interview you, and I hope as the Union improves, so does your work life. Alright, thank you folks for watching tape 1 of 20 years of forming the Union. My name is Brandon Borromeo, and we will be right back with a new African-American female worker from Lawrence, Massachusetts, after a commercial break. Thank you. Welcome back, folks. I am Brandon Borromeo, and you are watching 20 years of forming the Union tapes. The tapes where I interview workers, hardships in the past 20 working for the Union. Last interview was former worker Miss Vanessa Aguilar, who dealt with the Union hardships in New York, such as both the Shirtwaist Strike, and Fire. Here with us now, I'm with Miss Ava Freeman. As an African American woman who was involved in the Lawrence, Massachusetts textile strike 8 years ago. Now, Miss Freeman, would you care to tell us the story about the strike in Massachusetts?
Thank you for having me, Mr. Romero. The strike was primarily targeted at the low cut pay us women had working in the mills. There was also child workers who dealt with the deadly machinery and kept getting injured. Thankfully, though, the Industrial Workers of the World Association helped us lead into the strike for our pay cuts and took many children to people who had sympathy for U.S. states only.
Wow, sending children to work in the mills? That's something that they can't handle.
Well, unfortunately, they didn't care. Whatever got the mills the most money. We were upset about our pay cuts, but we were most upset about the children working in such conditions. As we were on strike, the police hit us and the children, and even pregnant women too. I got a scar on my arm from being beaten.
My Joe!
That was enough for Congress to get involved, thankfully. The abuse by police officers and the children set so much sentiment that once Congress got involved, they signed to hold investigative hearings and saw that horrid conditions of our workplace at Lawrence Mills.
What happened after that?
Thankfully, the company agreed to all our demands of the pay cuts and the children working for the company, thus helping the unionization of the garment industry, which was still nice. I still work there today, and I must say the strike was something the company really needed to hear. I'm able to help provide for my own children and even my husband a little more now than before.
Well, I'm really happy for you. And I hope you and your family get through this tough time.
I really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, that's all we have for this interview. I'm Brandon Borromeo, and you are watching 20 Years of Forming the Union Tapes. Next interview, we'll be discussing a male mine worker that worked for the J.D. Rockefeller mines in Colorado. We will see you after a commercial break. Welcome back, folks. I am Brandon Borromeo, and you're watching 20 Years of Forming the Union Tapes, where I interview workers from the past 20 years and their stories working for the union. We have had a lot of crazy stories involving two women and their hardships. One of which involved policemen beating pregnant women during the textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts. That was Miss Ava Freeman. Here with me today is a former worker from the United Mine Workers, Michael Thompson. Michael worked for the J.D. Rockefeller mines in Colorado for months. Now, Mr. Thompson, could you tell us what it was like working for the mines?
Working for the Rockefeller was terrible in my time. Back in 1913, I was involved in the deadliest strike in U.S. history.
What happened? Can you tell us about that?
We protested due to the horrific conditions of the mines for months. We instigated violence to get our point across to them. It became so bad that on April 20th, 1914, I believe, the National Guard, I think that's what it was, along with local militiamen, attacked us with machine guns and all sorts of weapons, killing a lot of men, women, and unfortunately children when we were on the strike.
That is awful, Mr. Thompson.
We had little tents set up in like a village area to gather around and store food and camp out, so we wouldn't have to stay in those horrendous, awful mines. They set fire to them as there's people in there, workers, families, our wives and kids, because they didn't want us to go on strike, and they thought us going on strike would be bad for the company. So we lost, I think, 11 children and 2 women due to the tents catching on fire. Sorry. A lot of them suffocated because of the flames and were either burned alive.
That is awful, Mr. Thompson.
Oh, but it was. The only thing that came out was that the government commissioned that the massacre would provide any support that we asked and demanded. So the work hours, the pay, and the horrible conditions were all fixed. The abolition of labor laws too, like families and children, also occurred because of the strike. It took children and women and workers dying for that to finally occur, which ticks me off to this day, but hopefully in the future workers could have a better life than we did.
It seems that the past 20 decades haven't been the greatest for forming the Union. For those watching, let's hope the Union gets better, and these laws eventually come to a halt. I'm Brendan Borromeo, and you're watching 20 years of forming the Union tapes. And I'm signing off with some honorable mentions. And for those in the future working for the Union, don't forget what a lot of these people died and lost their lives for. Thank you.